now, or do I wait a little bit? 3 minutes?
When you want.
I think we give 3 minutes just to be on the dot, because I think then if people are jumping around, or if they're coming from the keynote, it would be better. Just give me 3 minutes, I'll be back.
Okay, no problem.
Angela, I think we can start.
Okay.
Yeah, on the dot.
I ask to all of you to mute the smartphone, because musical ringtones cause issues with live streaming on YouTube, since copyright issues. Okay, we can start whenever you want.
Yeah, we can start, yeah. Shall we start? Hello? Are we live now? Okay, good. Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. I am Clarice Pleu de Souza from the Welsh School of Architecture, Cardiff University, and I will chair this workshop conceived with my colleagues, Professor Valerio Cucini from the University of Pisa, Dr. Federico Cerucci from the University of Brescia, and Camilla Pizzica from Cardiff University and University of Pisa. We are going to be running 2 sessions on computerized evidence-based decision-making. And in this workshop, we intend to explore the reasoning process behind how digital evidence is integrated throughout planning, urban design, urban infrastructure, transport projects, as well as building and product design processes. We got 3 submissions related to planning and urban design and 2 submissions related to building design. So we have 3 presentations in this session, followed by a mini roundtable plus 2 presentations in the next session, which is going to be chaired by Valerio, followed by another mini roundtable. The mini roundtables at the end will be swapped, so Valerio will do the mini roundtable in this session, and I'll do the mini roundtable in the next session. And we are going to focus initially on the urban scale and then on the building scale. I now leave the floor to the presenters, starting with Diego Taffini, who is going to be presenting joint work with Professor Valerio Cucini, Tuscany Configurational Atlas, a GIS-based multi-scale assessment of road circulation network centrality hierarchies. So Diego, the floor is with you.
I can't hear anything. Is there a problem?
I can't hear anything too.
Okay, we can try again.
Hello. Okay. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear
Yes.
you. Yes.
Okay, maybe it was a problem with the input. Let me see if I can fix the output here, so we don't have the return. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, of course.
Okay. Then it was a problem with the definition of the input source on Jitsi. Sorry, it's the first time for everyone.
No problem.
Okay, thank you. Let's try again, once again. Okay. Everyone ready? Everyone can see the screen?
Yes.
If you give me the okay, I begin again.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So, esteemed colleagues, greetings for everyone, and sorry for the technical problems. I am Diego Ottafini from the University of Pisa, and together with Valerio Cutini, I will present, we did this paper, and I will present and discuss the process of construction and the prospects of our Tuscany configurational atlas. This atlas is a GIS-based multi-scale assessment of the road circulation networks and centrality hierarchies. For those who may be not familiarized, the road network centralities configuration can be interpreted as a representation of movement dynamics within a system. Therefore, this can give us spatial information about movement potentials, distribution, and the preferential routes usage within a road infrastructure. So basically, this configurational atlas describes the movement logics in the Tuscan region. I structured the presentation in 5 points. In the first, I will be speaking about our motivations into assembling this atlas. In the point 2, they use data sets and some methodological principles. After that, an overview of the current interface and how the thematic maps that data is disposed on this atlas. Then make a brief discussion about some usage prospects for this data set. And finally, I will do some concluding remarks, and more importantly, what future improvements can be done for this configurational atlas. So, to a little context. The geographic information systems have been, for a long time, a very niche instrument used by cartographers and geographers, mostly due to the restricted access nature of the GIS software and the steeping learning curve required to use it. But these paradigms have since then changed as the open source GIS became available and also coupled with advances in public and open spatial database that allowed more other fields of research to participate in its development. Urban analysis is one of these fields, and the GIS, how can I say, it enabled to produce and to create information very useful to decision making and city design. Still, some significant hindrances still persist for the assessment of regional sized areas, as there are issues related to scale and processing times that are determinants for the representation of different variables, especially those related to the road infrastructure and its analysis as a network. So since with these difficulties, it's very difficult, it's very problematic to individuate spatial relations between built spaces and the networks that make, how can I say, the linkage between those areas. Overall, this impairs the explanation of certain urban and regional phenomena. In this sense, our general research has a compulsory demand for such road circulation network database, for a big and complete database, which prompted this atlas construction, which is conceived both as a research phase, as a integral part of our research, but also as an experiment that assesses the viability of future projects. In this sense, our main objective was to illustrate the road circulation network's morphologies and the configurational properties of the Tuscan region, organizing a group of thematic maps that not only depicted the regional scale movement dynamics, but also allowed us to compare it with other scales, such as provincial or municipality scales. In this aspect, we had the requirement that our database requirements. The atlas is assembled as an open source GIS project. The data sets that we used for the network analysis are derived from the Tuscan region road graph, which is a road centerline dataset cured by the Tuscan region. We choose this dataset instead of other open source alternatives such as the OpenStreetMap, mostly due to its homogeneity and the compatibility with other databases provided by the region that are available on our regional, territorial, and ambiental information system. Regarding this database, we made a further generalization of the network, the road network, using the Douglas-Becker algorithm in order to reduce the complexity and in hope to achieve shorter processing times, which was the main problem in working with such large territorial area. The realization process, however, is a little bit different from other types of generalization applied to other regional scale studies, because it uses a very small tolerance in order to preserve the morphology of the network, which for us is a very important aspect, since we want to be able to compare the different scales from the municipality scale to the regional scale. In this aspect, it was this tolerance was chosen to instead of reducing the road graph to fundamental shapes, in order to preserve the accuracy of the urban form. Even with this small tolerance, it can be seen that there was a very significant decrease in the road's element number once the angular segmentation is meant for 4 million segments to 1 million segments. This resulted in a great decrement of the regional total time of processing from the 7.5 months to only 2.5 months. I mean, both of these time lapses are still high, but we are talking of a very large network here. Then
1 more minute, Diego.
Okay. So passing to the dataset configuration. This angular segmentation step was a necessary step for using the angular segment analysis, which used to highlight the centralities, both the closeness centrality that depict the accessibility, and the betweenness centrality that depicts the preferential routes within a system. We use those two variables, normalize these two variables in order to allow the comparison between the scales. In a total, we arrived on 604 individual datasets, organizing regional, provincial, and municipality maps. In this aspect, we organized the Atlas interface, which this proper hierarchy that begins on the Tuscan region and proceeds to allocate each one of the other types of map. In this aspect, we set these various databases to be mutually exclusive in the same hierarchy. For example, if you want to compare a city with a region, we can. But compare both variables, since those variables are not correlated, have no relation between themselves, it's set to be mutually exclusive to facilitate the view, the network view.
Diego, I need to ask you to conclude because we are above time already.
Okay. So basically, the prospects of the map are these maps are basically we can integrate them with our regional and with territorial and ambiental database to create important how can I say important analysis that can correlate both populational distribution, the distribution of built structures, and also to use these maps for theoretical prospects in the network analysis. So, in concluding, the Tuscany Configuration Atlas demonstrated potential to go beyond its original purpose as data repository. And being set on a GIS environment, it allows us to conceive computational planning support systems and to use it to help in the decision-making process. Forthcoming improvements for the Atlas are the integration to a online web G suite to improve public access to this type of spatial information, and the gradual expansion of the Atlas dataset to integrate other regional database and assess the configuration of hierarchies for whole Italy. So thank you for the time, and I'm open to questions and to further clarifications if needed. Thank you.
Considering the time, I would invite our next presenter to come, and then we can potentially take the questions at the very end. So I give the floor to Valerio Di Pinto and Antonio Rinaldi from University of Napoli, Federico II, and they are going to talk about the quantitative structure of the city and the residential estate market, some evidences.
Hello, I am here. I share my desktop. Okay. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can see and hear you. All fine.
So, good afternoon to everyone. My name is Valerio Di Pinto, and I'd like to talk to you about the use of configurational analysis in decision support processes. More specifically, our work is a preliminary study focused on the use of space syntax, which is the foundational theory of configurational analysis, to interpret and predict real estate dynamics. As you know, the topic is very important in urban planning, especially in strategic master planning. Despite I am quite sure that everyone is at least an idea what configurational analysis is and what is not, I want to say that in configurational perspective, the city is two things. First of all, it is a system of human activity linked by interaction, what we call the social city, and describe the function of the city. And it is also a large collection of buildings linked by space, what we call the physical city, that describe the shape of the city. These two things are two sides of the same coin, so that analyzing the configuration of the urban grid, we are able to foresee human activities and all related phenomena. The idea is that a physical city brings in reality the social ideas that drives and are driven by human activities. Reducing the city in a network, we are therefore able to focus on human interaction it expresses. Under this idea, we propose to investigate on the role of railway system in affecting the price of the city, since it concerns us to one of the most important life investment for many people. As a first step, our attention is paid on the topology, and it means to suppose the syntax of the city is completely capable to render the influence of railway system and the related shapes that are the station, something else, on the distribution of residential prices, only taking into account the change induced on the topology of the city as a whole. Our methodology is therefore quite simple, since it is based on the comparison among two scenarios. A first one that does not include the railway system in the topology of the city, what we call the scenario 0, and the second one that included what we call the scenario 1. The comparison is performed both with reference to the configurational state of the system, so the comparison among configurational indexes, and to the distribution of residential values. Entire process is made within a GIS environment, to be more precise, ArcGIS, recurring to a tailor-made tool pivoted on DepthMapXNet. We are developing in the last years an ArcGIS add-on. The methodology is applied to a case study. Our case study is the city of Naples in the south of Italy. The city has more than 3 million inhabitants within its metropolitan area. and a very high population density, 8,000 inhabitants per square kilometer in average, with astonishing peaks. The city has a complex morphology, degrading from hills to the sea, and is directly exposed to natural risks, especially seismic and volcanic, for example by Vesuvius and Campi Flegrei that are still active. As you can see in the picture, the analysis of the city in scenario 0 highlights the presence of one integration core, corresponding to a high polarization of choice and integration indexes. I rely that all of you has an idea of what they mean. The comparison among the syntax of the city and the residential prices highlights that there is a strict relationship in their distribution, since at higher values of integration correspond higher sensitivity to price change and higher prices as well. However, it's not univocal, this relationship, since there are few places where the correlation is almost subverted. For example, in the neighborhood of Posillipo, that lies on the hill, directly facing the Gulf of Naples, where the prices are very high and the configurational values are very low. In scenario 1, the railway system of the city is modeled, with its 12 lines and the related 84 stations that lie in the urban area. The model includes only lines and stations that are active, since there are new lines and new stations that are still in construction. Railway lines have been modeled as topological connections among the configurational line where station lies. As a result, no substantial change in the configurational structure as well in the correlation with residential prices could be recognized at a glance. At a deeper analysis, a stronger polarization could be noticed, and it means that the monocentricity of the city is reinforced. The change is recognizable in the picture, where you can see the envelope of cold spot in scenario 1 overlapped to the spot plot of scenario 0. Red dots correspond to the most integrated lines in the picture. It has a direct influence on the correlation among syntax and prices, since it becomes globally weaker in scenario 1 as reported by the following picture. Here, you can see how changed the quality of the correlation among configurational indexes and the distribution of residential prices, summarized at the level of the neighborhood. As you can see, for the largest part of the neighborhood, the quality decreases, since the bars are on the downside of the graph, below the x-axis. Summarizing, if we provide the model of the city with the connections of the railway system, the correlation among the syntax of the city and distribution of residential prices lowers reliability. There are many possible explanations to this unexpected result. Among them, which we briefly analyze in the paper, there is the option that such a complex matter needs to be approached through a solution where objective and subjective knowledge are integrated. We called it configurational ontology, and by now is a mid-term research goal. We can render the form, the shape of the city, the physical layer of the urban environment, as an ontology that is a formal description of knowledge, and express it by a graph database that is a novel kind of database within the family of NoSQL databases, where there are nodes, any kind of objects, and edges, any kind of relationships among objects that are very flexible and allow to connect different types of information as we need. The idea is to integrate these two kinds of graph DB. First, the configurational DB, that this is natively a graph DB, and it stores the quantitative information on the functioning of the city, and a semantic DB, that is the ontology of the city in itself, and that's describe the qualitative information of the shape of the city. These two DB could be therefore connected each other at the level of the single node. In our vision, we aim to define a way to explore this complex DB, where there are many types of connection, by using the common tools of a graphical approach. So not using a structured query language, the SQL language commonly used with relational databases, but algorithms like Dijkstra or minimal path and so on. By now, we are working, and when I say we, I mean not only the authors of this paper, but also other researchers, perhaps involved in this interesting workshop also, on the development of a reliable ontology of the city structured in a graph DB. Although we are far from the goal, we think that it is a promising approach to explore new capabilities and fields of application for configurational analysis. Thank you for your attention. I'm done.
Thank you, Valerio, for being on time. I opened this part for questions, so if you have any questions to Valerio, that would be nice. Any questions to this presentation?
I have one.
Great.
Hi. First of all, thank you for your presentation. It's been very interesting. And obviously, I had a bit of an introduction because I was able to read the paper beforehand. And I noticed that you presented the DTM of the city of Naples there. And I was wondering if in the configurational analysis, that could have been relevant. And if you had considered, given that you said that Posillipo was in the hilly area, that perhaps the height levels might have made a change or a difference.
It is a good question. It is a basic question in configurational analysis, because someone thinks that DTM, that elevation is important in configuration analysis, and someone thinks it's not, because the structure, the configurational structure of the city include in itself the elevation. For example, to climb a hill, the streets are very are not linear. There are some troubles with streets. So I did not take into account the elevation, but I think I am sure that configuration analysis could grasp the elevation in itself. So I think that a model that don't take into account elevation works well. So I don't know if I answered your question.
Yes. It's just because I saw that you had the DTM, and I was wondering if you worked with that or not, and you answered your question. So
okay,
thank you.
Thank you very much, Valerio. I now give the floor to Camilla Pezzica, who is going to present a joint work with Chiara Chionni, Professor Valerio Cuccini, and myself, a collaboration between the University of Pisa and Cardiff University, called Assessing the Impact of Temporary Housing Sites on Urban Social Spatial Performance, the case of the Central Italy earthquake. Camilla, the floor is with you.
Thank you. Let me see. It's probably not the right screen. Sorry. I'll have to share it again. Yeah, all right. I need to share the other screen. That was my, let's see. Can you see something now?
Yes, we can see, but it's not the slides. So yeah,
do you see it now?
Fine. Yes, we see the slides.
Yes. All right. Thank you. So hi, everybody. I am Camilla, and I have the pleasure to present to you a study which has been conducted between the University of Cardiff and Pisa. And I'm talking about how to plan the unplanned, and specifically how we can make deliberate choices about the design and planning of temporary housing sites after urban disasters. And our proposal is illustrated in the case of the 2016-2017 Central Italy earthquakes. But first of all, what is temporary housing? By it, we don't mean any specific building type, but just an accommodation that is supposed to facilitate the transition from disaster relief to permanent housing. A temporary house is different from a shelter in that it allows occupants to resume household routines, and therefore it is meant to be used in the midterm. Often, due to the investments that they demand, the use of temporary housing is being contested. However, its role in providing dignity to the internally displaced is widely recognized. Therefore, it seemed important to us to foster the holistic planning of temporary housing interventions so that they can align better with urban sustainable development goals and with the Building Back Better paradigm supported by the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. And appears particularly important within the Italian context, where the lifespan of temporary housing sites in the past has often exceeded the 3 to 5 years range that is normally considered as the typical one in international humanitarian guidelines. And as you can see, the Central Italy earthquake case is no exception to this empirical rule, although in the latest disasters, the average duration of the temporary housing sites has been comparatively shorter than it used to be in the recent past. And on top of this, the COVID-19 pandemics has also highlighted the importance to quickly deal with emergencies, as well as to accommodate additional shocks and uncertainty when planning a transitional city. So, to address these issues, our proposal is to embrace the inner complexity of the problem by adopting a systemic approach to its study. Specifically, we suggest to simultaneously look across spatial scales and time by considering a set of meaningful moments in the disaster management cycle. And this approach is highly dimensional in nature, and different tools may be used to implement it. We adopted space syntax as an overarching method to assess the impact of temporary housing sites on urban sociospatial performance due to the scalability of the method and its suitability to be integrated with other data if relevant. And we've seen it before in the other presentations. The image on the right represents the earthquake-affected area, whose boundary is used to delimit our analysis at the regional scale. In red, you can see the external perimeter of the 4 most damaged municipalities, which represent the focus of this study. And due to its significance, only one of these, that is Arquata del Tronto, was selected for an in-depth examination at the neighborhood scale. The macro-scale analysis is used to clarify the relational character of the earthquake-generated geography, which naturally defies pre-existing administrative boundaries. These maps show the distribution of 2 important network centrality metrics, which Diego has introduced before, which evidence the street segments with the highest accessibility levels and intensity of vehicular flows in the area. Overall, the region is marked by the presence of several small settlements inhabited by an aging population, which seem to be part of a weakly connected system of towns scattered across a rather large mountainous area. Of these, the 4 municipalities selected in this study seem to be a significant and representative sample. You can see them in gray. The analysis at the urban scale is done by comparing results at 4 meaningful time steps, that is T1 before the earthquake, T2 right after it in the emergency phase, T3 in the recovery phase when the temporary housing sites are effectively built, and finally T4, which represents a future reconstruction scenario, a possible one, which is corresponds to the hypothesis of reconstruction as it was where it was. As time is tight, I'm going to show you only a couple of cities which I want to use to make 2 points mainly. The first, and this is the case of Accumuli that you can see here, is that the impact of temporary housing sites is likely to be not negligible in the long term, even if their influence is felt more during the recovery phase rather than after the reconstruction is completed, due to the length of the T3 phase. And the second, which you can see here in the case of Arquata del Tronto, is that temporary housing sites, if not dismantled and properly regenerated, may have an irreversible impact on a recovering city, long after reconstruction works are terminated. For instance, the analysis here shows that if the temporary housing sites survive in the existing configuration, Arquata will probably undergo a process of decentralization with the consequent delocalization of economic activities in the outskirts of the historic settlement, and specifically in the proximity of Borgo 1 temporary housing site. And if we look at the changing configuration of Borgo 1, we can observe how the layout at T3 has generated a novel distribution of accessible locations, which are likely to maintain their importance in the T4 reconstruction hypothesis. However, the Borgo 1 temporary housing site seemed to lack the relational qualities of the public open spaces of the old town, and therefore a regenerative T5 alternative for the site may probably represent a much needed corrective planning strategy at this point. The case of Arquata del Tronto shows the importance to reconcile post-disaster housing recovery with reconstruction goals when planning a transitional city. Boosting the liberation capacities in humanitarian decision-making through a scenario-based planning may thus help overcoming the natural temptation of decision-makers to jump to obvious but really not so obvious conclusions when planning the temporary under uncertainty. And hence, it's crucial to always question if it is appropriate to look for further information before making a decision and make an effort to retrieve this information and those that may not be immediately available but potentially useful. In conclusion, this paper advocates for a performance-based planning of temporary housing sites. We showed that a scenario-based planning supported by space syntax analysis could effectively contribute to achieve this goal by enabling the assessment of both temporary housing locations and layout arrangements. We also proved that going back to the pre-disaster situation is highly unlikely, even if all the temporary housing sites are dismantled at the end of the recovery phase, which is why it would be important in future studies to consider synergies between spatial and environmental aspects, which can foster the design of the temporary housing sites. And I've finished. Thank you.
Thank you, Camila, for keeping the time. I open again the floor for questions. And any questions for Camila? Anybody from the audience? Any questions for Camila?
Clarice, Federico here. I have a question for Camila, if possible.
Sure.
You were talking about gathering additional pieces of information, which information might be more relevant, important, and I suppose a different timeline, different part of your timeline, you will need different pieces of information. So do you have any idea on how you would deal with this information gathering process?
Yeah, there is a big mapping effort that needs to be done in order to be able to know that for certain, and probably also some qualitative interviews. At the moment, I've been trying to reconstruct the process of the temporary housing planning in the case of Central Italy and try to map it formally in order to understand which information would be needed when. Obviously, the problem is not trivial, and most of the decisions are made without actually tracing them. But I believe that it would be important to fulfill the vision that is represented in the documents to include environmental information in the planning stage, which at the moment seem not to be really considered, together with qualitative spatial aspects, which at the moment are just used, for compliance rather than to trying to design something which works and is performative. So I guess my answer is it's an ongoing work, and it really needs a lot of digging up information and asking people.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Questions for Diego, because we didn't have much time in the beginning. So any questions for Diego, which was the first presentation about configurational atlas? Okay. In which case, I pass the floor to Professor Valerio Cuccini to run a mini roundtable so we can have a final discussion on the urban and, well, especially on the urban and planning aspects of this workshop. Valerio, with you.
Hi, Clarice. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Oh, let's try to roughly summarize. Diego talked about the grid configuration as a key element in territorial and urban geography. Valerio talked about the influence of grid configuration on real estate markets, and Camila talked about the importance of grid configuration in managing temporary housing. So the clear fil rouge that connects the three presentations is therefore the importance of grid configuration and its influence on urban phenomena. From my point of view, a question seems to arise: the apparent mismatch between temporariness and permanence. I am just referring to the contrast between the configurational logic of the grid, which is intrinsically rigid, as constructed for a long time horizon and actually difficult to modify in short terms, and the fluidity of urban aspects and urban phenomena, which are variable and are more and more difficult when not even impossible actually to predict. Therefore, I would like to propose a kind of short roundtable in order to exchange our views on this matter. And first, I would like to ask you all, Diego, Valerio, and Camilla, to give us some short words for an overall discussion of this issue, and more punctually, what we draw out of the analysis of the grid can be used to support the managing of highly variable and unpredictable phenomena. And so I would give the floor to Diego, who was the first, and then to Valerio and Camila for exchanging our ideas.
Can I ask people that are not speaking, please, to mute their microphones so that we have less interference? Thank you.
Do you want me to, which part of my speech?
No, that's okay. I think we understood. So I think we can leave the floor to Diego, Camila, and Valerio to make their contribution. Yes.
Oh, that's fine. Oh, Diego.
Okay. Well, from my point of view, knowing configuration of the characteristics and the patterns in our urban grid can give us the insights about the movement behaviors, and with these movement behaviors very clear, we can predict impacts that can be caused from the variations of the urban structure that happen fast, as you pointed out. So in this sense, decision making with the knowledge of these characteristics and these movement behaviors can be based on evidence, and both time and money can be saved on mitigating in planning, since we can control better the how can I say, the consequences of these phenomena. But for this, of course, having the database and have the clarity in the methods that impacts and foresee how the nature, how the configuration of the urban grid is structured is primordial. In this sense, this is why my colleagues' works are very important. In the sense, we can develop better methodologies and better instruments that allows us to not lose too much time with modeling, but primordially use the readily available information to make the assessment need in the correct time. Basically, is this how I see the need for configuration and configuration analysis of urban areas.
Thank you for your words, Diego. And so, Valerio, could you please add your consideration?
Yes. I agree that the urban grid defines a long-standing pattern of potentials on which the dynamic of the city runs, expressed by the human behavior and the building of open and closed spaces with distinctive features and modes of use. They are not ever current with grid and for sure very fast to change. I think that is paramount to harmonize these two elements, expanding the capabilities of configurational analysis to take into account formal features that are the shapes of the city, the qualitative information that can store this element fastly changing of the urban environment, which have direct bearing on the functioning of the city as well. My idea, as I expressed presenting my paper, is to use ontologies and graphical databases in the aim to give flexibility and resilience to light change to configurational approach.
Thank you, Valerio. Camila?
Hi. I think they've all made very interesting comments. What I would add to that is that if you think about urban grid in a way, in many Italian cities which have, the Roman plant that came from the actual camps of the Romans going to war, you can actually see how the temporary became an actually very permanent sign in the Italian territory and something that has been working through the centuries. So in a way, that was a resilient and robust design that was able, even at a time where you couldn't even imagine cities the size they are today, to grow and support the changing functions that inevitably came later in time. So the fact is to think about the grid in an abstract way, and think about the important properties and trying to separate them from all the rest in order to think about a robust system that is able to accommodate change. And potentially also the fact that it is permanent is also linked to the materiality of it, but in some cases, and especially in the peripheral area, it's less so. So in a way, the temporariness of that is also can be a blueprint for experimentation and then future permanence. So what I think it's really important, because space syntax give a key to read the abstract characteristics that can allow something to change into something different, and then all the rest comes and materialize that vision.
Thank you, Camila, too. I would like to add some few words to the very interesting words I've just heard from our colleagues. And I would say that, in my opinion, this mismatch between temporariness and permanence is exactly what makes adaptability a fundamental property. A key question is therefore to which degree a grid is suitable for supporting different functional patterns and different urban social structural organization. And so what makes resilience in terms of flexibility a fundamental property, and more and more fundamental as time goes by. I thank you very much, and I'd like to give you the floor, Clarice, if you want to add something, or just to it's I don't know what time do we have to close this session.
We still have a few minutes, but I understand people are starting to jump and go to other sessions. Yeah. And we have another session coming, so I ask Angela if we stay in the room or if we leave.
Yes, we can stay. Yes, okay. You can manage your time as you want.
Okay.
if you want go on with all the presentation and reserve some time for a final roundtable, it's okay for me. It's up to you.
Okay. Well, I take this last 2 minutes, 3 minutes to invite everybody to submit papers and contributions. I'll share my screen now. Allow. I'm not sure if I can share my screen. How do I do that? Anyway, I would like everybody to invite to submit to a special issue that I'm running and co-editing with Andras Wright in the Journal of Sustainability MDPI called Regenerative Buildings and Beyond: Scale Jumping Sustainable and Net Zero Designs to Regenerative Neighborhoods, Districts, Communities and Cities. The deadline for submissions of abstracts is 31st of October 2020, and submission of manuscripts, full manuscripts, 31st of January 2021. And I think I will leave people here for a refreshment break, and then we can start the next session in exactly 7 minutes, right?
All right.
So thank you all.
We can get a coffee break.
Yes, a coffee break, an espresso for the afternoon, and then we come back in 7 minutes. Okay? Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, Clarice. We
Yes?
are just in the same room, just here.
Yes, in the same room. Yes, I think we can stay where we are.
Okay. Okay. See you.
See you soon in 7 minutes. Bye bye.
Thank you all.
Bye. Bye bye.
See you.
Angela, are we live?
Yes, of course.
Ah, okay.
Do you need me?
No, I was just thinking. No, I was just thinking if we are live on YouTube now or if we are closed.
No, we are live.
Ah, okay.
We are live. Okay.
Okay.
Valerio.
Yes, I'm here.
Ciao Valerio, sono Valerio. Comunque Medellin è grande.
Sì? Molto?
È 2/3 di Napoli la parte urbana.
Mannaggia. Poi ne parliamo, dai.
Sì, sì.
Vi lascio da soli se dovete parlare. Ho sentito
No,
solo ma ne parliamo.
No. Abbiamo un incontro da Medellin. Dobbiamo fare.
Ok.
Angela, are you there?
Yes.
Please tell me when it's time to go. I don't know. I don't know if Paris is there.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
Of course you are. Of course you are. And so please tell me when do you want to start the session?
Hi everyone.
Hello.
Hello.
I am ready and we are perfect on time. So when you want.
Yeah, whenever you want. Is exactly 5:30 for you, 4:30 for me. So you can start, Valeria.
Yeah, actually we are even too much on time for and so let's go on and please let me find. Good afternoon to you all, but we are just making a continuation of the first half of the session on computerized evidence-based decision making, a session that was organized by Clarice Blade de Souza, by Federico Ceruti, by Camilla Pezzica, and by myself. And this second part of the session will include two presentations, and I'm just looking here, to find. And the first one, the first presentation will be delivered by Dario Esposito, Davide Schaumann, Domenico Camarda, and Yoga Kalai. And the title will be Decision Support Systems Based on Multi-Agent Simulation for a Special Design and Management of a Built Environment, the case study of hospitals. And I think that the scheduled time will be, please correct me if I am wrong, will be 8 minutes. And isn't it?
8 minutes. 8 minutes for the presentation plus 2 for the answer.
Okay, thank you. And so I will disturb you when just 3 minutes are to come, and please, you're welcome. And I invite Dario Esposito to present the first work, first work, and I give you the floor.
Thank you, Professor Cutini. Hi, everyone. And let me share my screen. Let me find how. Okay. Okay, let me. Please tell me if you can see my screen.
It's uploading. Yeah, I see. I see myself. Yeah.
So, can you see the screen?
No, I think it's better for you to share the whole desktop instead of the software of this window.
Let's try. Okay.
Yeah, it works.
Okay, perfect. Sorry. So, hi everyone, I'm Dario Esposito from the Polytechnic University of Bari. I will present you some thoughts about a research which I conducted in Israel. with Professor Yehuda Kalai on decision support system based on multi-agent simulation for the management of a built environment. Well, as we already know, decision situations are often complex, multidisciplinary, usually involve multiple agents and type of information, and can raise uncertainty. Precise prediction is almost impossible, but to understand urban change and to support development, forecasting cannot be avoided. Decision-making adopt methods and model and consideration of the context and its variables for analysis of a real-world system. Decision support systems help in estimating the implication and consequences of possible decisions before the actual execution, which is also important to justify the decision that is made. As well, the human-environment relation system is complex, and the architecture of space is often inadequate. There is a need for integration of human spatial behavior into the design process in order to improve the development of infrastructure and management of cities. Our study aims to support the design and planning from a human-centered perspective. This is achieved by facilitating an understanding and consideration of the use of a built environment with agent-based systems. This helps to better evaluate the impacts of the built environment on people and to understand their needs as well as constraints and safety requirements. Well, planners and architects have at their disposal several computational tools to evaluate quantitative building performances and characteristics such as cost, energy consumption, material feature, and structural stability. However, they rarely find formal method to forecast whether, from a user perspective, the design infrastructure will perform before it has been built and tested through use, especially for the most qualitative aspects such as human satisfaction, productivity, or safety. In order to understand user adaptation to an environment and their preferences, as well to assess the effects of spatial morphology, the dynamic of human spatial behavior can be simulated with agents who are capable of understanding indoor and outdoor built environments and thus act accordingly. In multi-agent system, the dynamic development of the system emerges from local interaction among autonomous decision-making entities. A realistic simulation of a built environment with multi-agent system emulates either the behavior of a single person or collective actions, accounting for how humans act and interact with each other and with the environment. An effective multi-agent simulation is a simplified replica of a real-world situation, which has reached a convenient trade-off between realism and usefulness. In our case study, we face two grades of complexity. On one hand, the procedural and organizational complexities of hospital, and on the other, the topic of infection spread, which cause thousands of deaths and billions of costs every year, increasing antibiotic-resistant bacteria emergency. We rely on the event-based technique for human building use, where space, actor, and activities are modeled in a computational environment. Events are designed to coordinate temporal, goal-oriented routine activities performed by actors. The event-based approach proved capable of realistically representing complex human activity and use of space scenarios by integrating the agent-based bottom-up approach with a high-level architecture to plan actors' behavior. The evaluation of the infection spread with the event-based approach involved several components, so actor, activities, and space, and was extended with inclusion of pathogens and the contamination states of actor and spaces. The interaction of such elements in the simulation run drives the pathogen transmission and thus the contamination propagation in the simulated hospital ward. To build a plausible case study, we use references, guidelines, sessions with experienced medical practitioners and healthcare workers, which were carried out in the form of interviews, observation, and questionnaires. To simulate the building and its intended user in a trial case study within coherent and dynamic scenarios of hospital-acquired infection risk, all the system elements were coded in C# within a Unity 3D simulation engine. The computer simulation was applied to develop a what-if analysis, and that focused on comparing situation of contamination propagation where spatial influence and social dynamics drive the pathogen dissemination. So we investigated the contamination risk due to the spatial behavior of agents and consideration about the use of built environment to foresee the effects of intervention policies, environmental organization, and spatial design on infection spread. We generated a dynamic time-based simulation of the building use, where some hospital procedures and daily activities are the system inputs, and the real-time dynamic contamination risk map of people and spaces was the main output. We can turn on and off the layer, the space layer for the contamination risk. To demonstrate the potential application of the simulation, different critical scenarios were hypothesized and run, after which the output were analyzed. There are three key factors which dictate the development of our scenario analysis. One of the purpose was to visualize contamination transmission and be able to assess the potential outcome of the infection spread caused by the implementation of prevention measures and organizational procedures. For instance, agent...
Dario, I beg your pardon, you have 3 minutes.
Yes. Agent hygiene behavior, contact precaution, and cohorting. An additional purpose was to gain a better understanding of the potential of our simulation system, drawn from the event-based approach in modeling human spatial behavior, and of further interest was an understanding of the effect of different architectural design and space distribution on the risk of pathogen propagation in hospital, on which we are currently working. This simulation visualizes in real-time contamination propagation dynamics, which is a phenomenon that is hidden from cognitive agents up until its appearance with symptoms. It depends on the profile and spatial choice of different kinds of agents, the user activities in the built environment, and characteristics of different pathogens. The simulation worked as a system to support decision on the real-time management of infection risk and also on the long-term process of planning and design of hospitals. Visualizing the chain of infection, it is possible to suggest whether it is more feasible to intervene. A key potential advantage is proving that if the organizational does not work, a different environmental design could help. Moreover, the simulation system could be useful in facilitating managers to issue instruction and recommendation to healthcare staff members and for their training. Some final thoughts, where prevention and control strategy are based on regulatory approach, expertise of physician, and previous experience. These are mostly countermeasures to deal with outbreaks. A critical challenge for architects is to improve the physical setting designed to make hospitals safer with improved healing procedures and better place to work by reducing risk from infection spread. To this end, virtual simulation is a valuable approach in investigating what-if scenarios. It offers the potential to identify new understanding of how a built environment may operate, providing evidence in support of decision-making process. This is often iterative, since alternative actions are analyzed and information gained from the what-if scenario analysis is used to get it further. Decision super system based on multi-agent simulation help describe the evolution of the system and its constraints, provide knowledge-based formulation of possible decisions, simulate scenarios of consequences of actions, and assist in the formulation of implementation strategies. With this, I kindly thank you for your attention, and I'm here if you have any question.
Thank you very much, Dario, for being in time, and for your interesting presentation as well. Is there any question to Dario on this presentation?
I have one.
Clarice?
I think it's a very interesting presentation. I read the paper beforehand, and one of the things that I was having in my mind when I read the paper, and also it really shouts from your presentation, is that normally what we know from hospital design is that you think about the flow of the doctor, the flow of the nurse, the flow of the medication, the flow of the patient coming in and out, the flow of visitors, and you sort of try to work with these different flows in different layers, try to isolate some of them, for instance, the flow of visitors from the flow of the doctors, not to disrupt. But you show the flow of the virus or the flow of infection, which is a different flow that I think it's not really considered. So how, from that kind of studies, can you inform the layout design of the hospitals? How, because this layer is a very important layer, and perhaps it hasn't been looked properly, and now with the outbreak, it's really in the air, and everybody is thinking about that for other buildings, not only for hospitals. So how can you, what are the lessons learned from this for layout, and how much more investigation do we need to do in our buildings? Do we always have to have like a layer for infections in our buildings now? So I ask you the question.
Thank you, Clarice, for your question. Well, yes, as we all know now, the hospital became hub for COVID-19 spread, and how we can use this approach. Well, I was lucky because I work with some colleagues from the Technion in Israel, and there was many aspects they tried to investigate with this approach. For instance, lightning or interruption, visitor interrupting physicians. There are many aspects that you can investigate. The way we used to grab some information on how actually design hospital ward is by run this simulation comparing different layouts. This is very useful. We didn't we haven't done for the infection spread yet, but to be honest, there are some general considerations that we can draw, which are classical but still useful from this kind of approach simulation, which are to avoid interference between different kind of staff member or patients and visitors. But this kind of simulation could be also tuned for different kind of pathogen, because in hospital there are different different kind of pathogen. Someone really spread through the air, some other through the environment on surfaces, and other in water. And so at the end, having the chance to tune a tool to find out how may happen without putting anyone at risk, in real danger, it could be useful. To be honest, from the side of architects, there is still not such openness to this kind of I mean, this kind of tool, this kind of proof or their concept or of their design. But at the end, this is the research. We are working to give the opportunity to improve the state of the art. And what else? This is also useful because it can also be useful to understand some unintended consequences, but also to investigate some common misconcept. For instance, it's not always said that double room is better than single room, for instance. And so having this tool could be useful. Of course, it's a simplification, so you must how to say, you must debate and discuss on results, but still it's something that could be useful. I call it the Google map of infection, and we are actually working also to tune the algorithm for the contamination transmission for the COVID-19 matter.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Dario, you gave us a long reply. I won't add a question, but much more a comment. It would be interesting, in my opinion, to compare the results of this interesting approach with the results of techniques and approach based on the analysis of the spatial features in order to compare the behaviors of agents with the results of the configuration of variables. But it was just a comment on my side. I thank you, Dario. And I would like to introduce the second and last presentation by Jonas Manuel, sorry for my pronunciation, Gremmelspacher, Julia Sivolova, Emanuele Naboni, and Vaid Nick. And the presentation will be entitled Future Climate Resilience Through Informed Decision Making in Retrofitting Projects. And
I can take over from this point.
Oh, you are here. Oh,
yes, I will start sharing my screen.
You are Jonas?
Yes, exactly.
And the pronunciation is Jonas or Jonas?
Jonas Manuel Gremmelspacher.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry for my bad pronunciation.
No worries at all.
Okay, I will give you once more 8 minutes, but I will make a ring when we are just three minutes before. Okay.
Very well. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thanks also for the introduction. I will jump right in, and I hope you can all see my screen now.
We see it.
Perfect. So in order to assess this topic that you have already presented, we used some ingredients. And the first one, because it's a case study, were also some real case studies that we used and did the theoretical assessment on. And these real case studies in Denmark, in Aarhus, and in Copenhagen, and then in Stuttgart in Germany, they were chosen to represent typical local constructions within their time frame that they're presenting. And our criteria was also to select some multi-residential buildings, not just single-family houses. And I want to peek out here also that none of the buildings had a active cooling system installed. That might become interesting later on. The second ingredient that we were using were future climate projections. And as we all know, they have different intensities here shown with the different RCPs that are out there. And we also have a lot of different sources that produce future climate projections. And we try to go as representative as possible. And we therefore used a total of 13 sources of future climate projections that then combined time frames. So we have chosen a time frame of 90 years and divided that one into 3 30-year sections. And we had sections from 2010 to 2039, and then the following 30 years, and the following 30 years ending with 2099, so with the end of the 21st century. And when we're looking at this picture that I'm showing here, we have the set of 90 years, and then we further went down, and we didn't just downscale a single year. We split this up in 3 time frames, as I just said, but we also split it up in an extreme cold scenario that is at the very bottom of this gray range of all these different sets of climate data. Then we have a typical downscaled year. That is the one that I'm going to pick you most at. I'm going to refer most to in my results that I'm going to present. And then we also have an extreme warm scenario that is at the hot end of the climate that is out there. But it's really an extreme condition. But our conclusions are also oriented towards, is it necessary to use these extreme conditions, yes or no? So with these ingredients that I just presented, the climate files and the geometry, including the specifications from the real case studies that were actually performed as retrofits, during the last couple of years, I would say probably around 10 years, back, all these buildings have undergone significant retrofits to be more energy efficient, and they've all been in the local frameworks. And we've used that data and all the different climate projections, which ended up being nine different scenarios for each building, for 3 time frames and 3 different scenarios, which were then run in this parametric kind of study. And we did it in Energy Plus in Open Studio, and we got the indoor thermal comfort according to the standard EN 15251 out of it, the energy use intensity of the building, and of course also the heating loads. And here I want to present for one of the case studies. This one is in Aarhus in Denmark. I want to present the cumulative heating energy demand, and mostly I want you to look at these black lines. And here we can see something that we've actually kind of been expecting. So over the 3 scenarios, over the 3 time periods, we're going down in energy use intensity for the heating. And that, as I said, was kind of expected, but we wanted to have this confirmed. We could also see that the heating periods, they were actually shortened. So we didn't have a heating need throughout most of the year. And this is in Aarhus in Denmark, where the winters are getting quite cold. So until November, all the way from March, mid-March, we didn't have any heating need at all. And I also want to say that the ECY, the blue one, the cold scenarios, and the EWY, the warm scenarios in red, they are relatively unrealistic to take part in a continuous time frame. They're anyways interesting in looking at, especially if we are now going to the next slide, where I'm showing the building hourly heating loads in kilowatt. And here it's more interesting in looking in all this data. So it's interesting to compare a team Y file that we use to compare basically all the investigation that we did with. That was just a typical team Y file that we could obtain from the known sources online. And we compared it with the first time frame of the 2010 to 2039, and we can see that, of course, the extreme cold year shows extremely much higher heating energy loads. This box plot diagram, however, also has a lot of outliers at the end that we regard as relatively insignificant for the heating system sizing. If, however, we only look at the TDY files, which is this one, the typical downscaled here, we can see that we could already minimize the heating loads by a lot towards the TMY file, which is dated up until somewhat in the 2000s in this case. And then along as we go, we are minimizing the heating loads by a little bit more. And I also want to show here that we have created data sets that consider this triple data, where we basically added up all the data stocks that we had for the TDY, ECY, and EWY scenarios.
Oh, Jonas, excuse me. Unfortunately, you have just 3 minutes.
Yes, perfect. And I wanna say on this slide that it's very, very relevant as evidence to use the extremas, but also the future climate scenarios to do the heating system sizing, because we can see that we are actually finally landing much lower than what we can see with the TMY data. So this information is quite important for us as designers. In order to design for the future, not for the past. And as I said before, there were no cooling systems installed, and this is why we unfortunately couldn't draw any conclusions on the cooling systems. But of course, here it would be the other way around, that the extreme warm scenarios would give us a much higher cooling load. Now I want to jump to the last category, which is the indoor thermal comfort. And here we're comparing the initial building, which is before the retrofit was done, with the retrofitted building on the right-hand side. And I want to once again show the black dots, which is a building average for the hours in discomfort that the building has. And we can see where the building was unrenovated, we were in the very low percentage of like up to 5%, still going upwards as we got closer to the end of the century, but we were in the very low percentages. When we came to the retrofitted building, this went significantly in the other direction. So we are seeing here for the building average, we're seeing numbers of about 40 to 50%, which are in the trend a little bit increasing towards the end of the century. But we've seen an outlier here in this middle period for this case study, which was located in Stuttgart. I want to especially show how important the information can be looking at the future climate projections for bioclimatic design, because if we want to design our building envelope and the shading systems, especially passive measures accordingly, it is very, very important to take the right climate into account. And of course, we cannot say which one is going to be occurring, but we have very, very good upscaling for the next couple of 10 years. And with that, I actually just want to conclude on saying that the biggest advantage was basically to use the future climate projections for information, and that can definitely inform the decision-making process throughout all stages. But my personal opinion is that it should be used early on in the decision-making process in the building design. And it showed also an extreme importance for designing both active and passive measures. In the building that we've been looking at, these were obviously done according to Team Y files or to climate files based on measurements, and our buildings, they all underperformed in the category of passive measures. And then in the system design, we should definitely also look into the extremas, because extremas are also subject to occur more often under the next centuries. And so it's has shown quite an importance to look into those. And with that one, I want to end my presentation.
Oh, thank you very much, Jonas. Thank you very much for your presentation. Is there any question to Jonas for this presentation? I have a small question when we are waiting for others. When you talk of active and passive measures for increasing resilience, you are talking of a heating plant or measures based and focused on the special features of buildings. I mean, typology, form of buildings, or even materials, or even more urban form.
Yeah, I mean, the drawing the line between active and passive measures in a retrofit, of course, is maybe a bit of a difficult thing to do, because I see it as some sort of an active measure to build in energy with, let's say, insulation. Yeah. But on a retrofit, normally this can be regarded as a passive measure. However, I think especially designing passive measures in order to increase bioclimatic design, we're speaking about shading, we're speaking about natural ventilation, we're speaking about maybe the use of free cooling, which in that sense then might be more towards being an active system. Yeah. But I absolutely agree with you that these measures that I've been counting, they're blend between active and passive measures.
I see it, because some of these measures I think are highly flexible, while others are much more rigid, I think, to the form of the layout, for instance, of kind of materials of the constructions or even the urban form, difficult to adapt to the changing variables, climate variables.
But exactly what you mentioned, I think, is actually the point where our study kind of stopped.
Yeah.
And where this needs to be looked into further. Which of these active and passive measures can we design in which way, and how can this actually feedback then information that can be used in the decision making process? How can this be done? This is probably the next step to be gone here.
Thank you very much, Jonas. Any other question?
I have one.
Oh, Clarice, you.
You talk about different weather scenarios, and then I was thinking, can we create, or how can we make an equivalence of that in the user behavior? Because if you imagine that, for instance, I'm sure we are not going to be living the same way in 2030 as we are now in 2020. So how would you think that the user behavior could follow these different climate scenarios? Because we can simulate with them, and I know there are lots of studies about future weather forecasts and things like that, and we tend to follow a lot of trends and statistical analysis and big data analysis and so on. But do we already have ideas about how user behavior could follow that? And could we design also like as if the user is following different trends in relation to these different weather scenarios?
I think you bring a valid point here. I actually have thought about this, but of course I don't have like a recipe how this could go. I think the biggest problem that we're seeing here, we have some data that is specified by someone. So do we actually, in the end of the day, know how many people are going to be living in the space? As we were assessing spaces that were still relatively small, how this could be implemented in this very study, I don't have a recipe for. For us, it was very important to show immediate differences. So to actually have this process with the same occupancy with all this, especially because we wanted to show what the future climate scenarios do affect. If we now would bring in this factor, we would kind of destroy or change our results according to the changing occupancy. So I agree that it's a valid point, but I don't know in which way it could be implemented in the methodology of this study.
Oh, thank you, Jonas. It is 6:06, and so I think we are perfectly on time. And so, Clarice, I don't know what time do we have to leave this room, but I think you may run this mini round table on these arguments, on these subjects. And so I will leave the floor to you, Clarice.
Thank you, Valerio. Yes, I have, if the audience, if the participants still want to stay, I don't know, but I throw a question to everybody for discussion based on what I've seen in this session. It seems to me that Dario shows we probably are designing in disconnection with users and also not really considering all our users, right? Because there are like the invisible users that go around and possibly with us in the building, which leads to ask the question, which leads him to ask the question of does use follow form, which I found was really interesting. Mm-hmm. And then Jonas shows that we probably are designing this connection with the climate, which leads us to ask questions on are we potentially designing obsolete objects or filters? And if you want to call buildings filters, we could consider maybe we are designing obsolete filters to the weather. So if we put these two together, it's quite a recipe for disaster, isn't it? Because if we are querying ourselves if use follows form, and if we are potentially assuming that that the filters are not responding to climate, we can be in complete disconnection, and we can be designing obsolete objects. So what is missing in our decision support systems? What would be a key information and key features of these systems that would enable us to design more robust filters and to potentially have use following form? So I ask you, Jonas and Dario, on that respect.
If I may answer?
Yeah, sure.
I think that there should be a manual. I mean, a manual on how to use space. I think that this decision support system should give also suggestion on how to use space. And I don't know if educate the users could be the answer, but still, I think that as everything humans do and create should be left to the interpretation of the user, but also the user have to at least try to understand what was the concept behind, what was the idea. And something that could be useful for me is a sort of manual, a sort of guideline, in particular in this risky situation. And in this case, the decision support system must act also as a guideline for the use of the space. So the education for me is the answer, if maybe.
I think that that is totally valid in buildings in which you really need to control things, such as in hospitals, for example. And I think I agree with you on that. But on the other extreme is Jonas on the houses, right? So we don't want to be told what to do inside our houses, right? We want to do whatever we want. So there is. So I pass to you, Jonas, on that to comment on that.
Yes and no. I think the building education factor is quite a large one, especially in terms when we're speaking about passive design. And then where we were looking at with our study was retrofit design for housing, for residential buildings, where we can we have to kind of expect a little bit of a user behavior that is adjusted to the building. And when it comes to bioclimatic design, I think it is very important that the user has an understanding when to close the blinds, when to open the windows, all these kind of things. And with the active systems that we've been adding to buildings in the last couple of years, maybe people have lost that sense for when to open the windows, when to close the blinds, when to activate and deactivate some certain measures. So I think that factor is really relevant. And another thing that I want to add is, Clarice, you just basically said this sentence: "Are we designing obsolete buildings?" And it's quite a good question, because this was what motivated us to do the study in the first place. Because my feeling from working in the retrofitting industry for quite some years was that we're actually doing something like that. We're doing things, and in southern Germany, where two of the studies were placed, we're doing essentially something that is insulating the buildings with bad materials, even in some cases, and we insulate them so thickly, so the thermal comfort is really going down, especially in the future climate scenarios that I've been showing, where we could see that people are just feeling too warm throughout a large time of the year. So I really agree with this thesis that we need to take into account something like that. And I've been actually quite happy when I was working with a BREEAM project last week, and I saw that in that BREEAM standard, there's nowadays a category where thermal comfort doesn't only have to be done according to the current climate, but also there is another point rewarded if doing this for future climate. So I was quite happy when I was seeing this, that there are some methodologies that are basically coming from studies as ours and previous ones, obviously, and that these uncertainties are kind of accounted for.
I ask another question to follow on from that one. It's like Dario speaks about the manual for the user, and when we talk about the obsolescence, shouldn't there be also a manual for the designer in that sense? And what would be the auditing procedure throughout the design process that would have, I don't want to say milestones because I don't want to be as normative as that, but what could be the auditing process to make sure that these are not obsolete and that potentially the use will try to follow the space distribution? Because in a way, we as designers, we have the power of persuasion, right? So we could also try to persuade users to use our buildings in the right way. And if we are clever enough, we potentially might not need this manual, or the manual might not be too thick in the very end. So what auditing procedures or what ways in the middle of the process would you put to be able to drip this information so that it can be taken into account in the decision-making process?
Please, Janos, you go first.
All right, I was leaving the floor to you, but I can go. I have a comment at hand, because I think once again what you said, Clarice, is very valid, and from our title, but also from our study, we were assessing this according to resilience. And if we take the word resilience and we think about that a little bit, digest, that essentially means to account for uncertainties. And there you're absolutely right that we kind of have to find a framework how we can account for these uncertainties. And when it comes to future climate scenarios, projections, there are these projections. So of course it's still an uncertainty, but an uncertainty that can be accounted for. On the other hand, of course, the other uncertainty that you mentioned earlier in your question about the occupancy pattern, for example, that one is then on another page, how to account for that one. So that's what I want to say.
And for my opinion, I mean, the Cobra effect is always at the next corner. But something that I would like to try to investigate in future, it's the use of digital technologies. I think that we have now this kind of device, ubiquitous device, which can help to build more intelligent building, which can adequate their configuration based on the user preferences, but also accounting for the user preferences and the behavior. I think that this could be a way for real-time monitoring and real-time managing a lot of aspects related to the building use and environmental use.
Thank you. I have a final question for Friday evening, which is basically, do you think that the current models that we have been using and the current tools and the current digital evidence that we have been using is actually contributing for us to meet UN Sustainable Development Goals, particularly number 3, which is good health and well-being, and number 10, which is about reducing inequalities?
I'll take the word again at this point. But the question that you're asking is very difficult for me to answer, and I can definitely not answer it with the results from our study. I can only answer it from my own philosophy. And
well, that's what it's supposed to be on a Friday evening. So
yeah, okay. So I think reaching the first goal, we have the means with the technology and with the tools that we have on hand. But if we're using them in the right way, and if we're making the best out of all the technology and out of all the information that we're having, I want to leave aside. I mean, my personal comment to that is probably not. There's so many inputs that go into a building performance simulation, for example, that can be done wrong. And when looking at studies that look at how people perform energy performance simulations, then I think many of them are done in a wrong way, or not in a necessarily wrong way, but in a different way than another one. So one and another is just not comparable to each other. So if there are more, I don't want to say strict, but more like close frameworks, then this could maybe be done in a more confirmed way, in a more accounting way for these uncertainties. I can only speak for my parts, which is the climate, although. And then when it comes to the goal number 10, there I feel very unprepared for answering this question. This is probably the question to talk about, in another context, because it's getting very philosophical. So I want to leave the word over again.
I think I'm trustful. I'm trustful in the research area, in the research field itself. I think that the research is going in the right direction. But the point, in my opinion, is the practice. And to meet the goal you have mentioned, we need a widespread practice for the better. Something that probably could be useful are the ISO regulation. I mean, when research become regulation, it's late, more or less always late, but it could be effective. And in the practice of building, of construction, and also in urban planning, without regulation, unfortunately, we cannot really meet these objectives.
It's a very grounded point, down to earth. Thank you very much. Valerio, I think I'm done with the discussion here, so I pass it back to you to close the session. If you don't want to add anything.
Thank you, Clarice, and thank you all our colleagues. Since I am the very homeowner of this virtual room, I now give back the key to Angela. And since tonight is Friday, I look forward to seeing you this evening at the social dinner, let's say. And so thank you and goodbye to everyone. I do really hope we are going to meet in person soon.
Yes.
And so goodbye. It was fine being with you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Valerio. Thank you all of the participants.
Thank you, Clarice. Thank you, Valerio.
It was a pleasure.
Good night.
Yes, and thank you for organizing in these very weird times also.
Thank you again. See you soon, we hope.
We do.
Goodbye, see you.
Bye.
Goodbye, Clarice.
Bye, Valerio. See you soon.
Thank you all. It's a pleasure.
See you very soon, hopefully.
Yes.
And Diego, we are going to see each other soon.
Yes, very soon.
Goodbye, Valerio. Goodbye, Valerio.
Bye.
Goodbye to everyone.
Goodbye. Angela, I give you the key.
Yeah, I'm gonna stay here for another hour, another section.
Are we on time?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay. It was nice being with you. Next time, hope to be there.
Thank you. It was a pleasure for me.
Goodbye, Angela.
Goodbye.
Bye.
I remember you to fill up the evaluation form. Okay. Okay. Iris? I don't know Iris? I don't know if the pronunciation is good. Okay. Good afternoon. I'm the assistant of this group. We are waiting for the chair and I think in 5 minutes we will start. You are the speaker for this session? Okay, perfect. Perfect. Okay, one. Yes. Yes. You can try. Yes. Yes, perfect. Good afternoon. Hello. Hello, I'm Lucia. I am the assistant for this group. Yes, are you the chair for this session? Okay. So guys, you can interrupt your sharing.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Hi, good afternoon.
Hey, good afternoon.
I'm Angela, the assistant for this room.
Hello, I am Birol Çileoğlu, the chair of the next session.
Yes. Please insert your name.
Okay, just a second.
Yes, you can click the 3 dots on the bottom right. And
yes, I've already seen it. Thanks. I guess it's okay now.
Perfect. Okay, before starting, I ask you to mute the ringtones, because if they are musical, cause copyright issues with the YouTube stream live.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Birol?
Yes.
Are you here? Okay. I couldn't hear you anymore.
Okay. I muted and I was waiting, that's why.
Okay. It's okay for me.
Can we start or should we wait a little bit longer?
I think we can start.
Okay.
So the stairs is yours.
Okay, so in this session, we are gonna have 2 presentations. Here you can check the first one. And this was supposed to be presented by the first author, but he had a last minute thing to deal, so he couldn't present. That's why I'm going to present it as the second author. The presentation is called Industry 4.0 Briefcase. This is actually gonna be the presentation of the results of a project with the same name. So this is an innovative engineering outreach project for professions of the future. And for the introduction, we can say that the project is titled this way. because it combines different components of Industry 4.0 technologies as a briefcase. And the main aim of the project is to increase awareness of university students on Industry 4.0 related topics. And these topics are machine learning, data mining, industrial automation, and more. I'm going to give more details in the later slides. And in addition to the academic content and theoretical lectures, the project also involved learning experiences such as learning by doing and teamwork activities and social activities as well. So when we check Industry 4.0, we can say that the main concepts are, when I read them like this: simulation, system integration, Internet of Things, cybersecurity, cloud computing, additive manufacturing, augmented reality, big data, and autonomous robots. So there are a lot of hot topics actually involved in Industry 4.0 technologies. And it combines all of these different technologies and makes it possible to develop more state-of-the-art innovations. So when we check our study, the methodology followed is going to be explained next. For the research model, we utilized a mixed methods approach. So both quantitative and qualitative data analysis were performed in the study. And for data collection, a lot of forms and tools were used actually. So mini projects that the students conducted at different parts of the project. And the project evaluation form that the students filled at the end of the project were used for quantitative measurements. And for qualitative measurements, two types of input were used. The first one is virtual classroom sessions that were conducted daily as an evaluation of the activities conducted at that day. And also a general evaluation session at the end of the project, which is conducted as a focus group interview. For the study group, there were 18 participants from engineering and business school undergraduate students. And the only requirement for students was to be a third grade, a junior student, and have a CGPA as 2 out of 4 minimum. So the participants were selected from the applicants after announcements were made to different universities and to different departments, such as computer engineering, software engineering, and management information system departments. For data collections, as I've said previously, actually, we used mini project evaluation forms, general project evaluation form, and virtual classroom sessions and focus group interviews, as I mentioned before. So for the application process, we're gonna see this in more detail in the next slide. So the project was conducted in 5 days between July the 1st and July the 5th in 2019. And we'll see the activities as a table. So if you check the table, here you can see the activities in a daily basis. On the first day of the project, after the opening ceremony, an introduction lecture, a theoretical lecture was given for Industry 4.0. And then, as the main subject of the first day, product lifecycle management presentation was conducted. And this activity involved 2 hours of theoretical and 1 hour of laboratory work. And after the first day, there was a daily evaluation session, which was conducted as a virtual classroom session. At the second day, there was just one activity, which was focused solely on the data mining. And here, 2 hours of theoretical and 3 hours of laboratory work were conducted. And then a virtual classroom meeting was arranged for the daily evaluation. For the third day, industrial automation and human machine interface were the topic of that day. And here, just 1 hour of theoretical lecture and 4 hours of laboratory work were conducted. And I'm so sorry. There is a technical problem with my laptop. It is, I guess it's out of battery. Can I take a break?
Sure.
Okay, just a second. I'm gonna try my best to handle it as soon as possible.
Okay. Amore mio. Non posso mettere in moto il microfono perché sennò si stoppa la diretta YouTube. C'è una sessione farlocca. Siamo io e un'altra persona. Quest'altra persona è sia il moderatore sia l'oratore di 2 interventi. Esatto. Amore mio, come stai? Che fai?
Venerdì, l'hai tolto? Cosa ne cambia?
No, non l'hai messa tu.
L'ho tolto, è vero. Ho preso prima, sì.
Che fai di cozzo?
Quindi domani Ovis.
Domani?
Vedete?
Vabbè, una bagnatura. Vabbè, tanto c'è.
Mi ha detto che arriverei per pranzo.
Vabbè, non mi aspettate, fate le cose con calma. Io non so se finisco alle 11 o a mezzogiorno.
Poi vado un po' prima, io a me, Alessandro. Che poi a sentire verrà piovere, non importa per tutta la Brasile, ma sentire più alto di vuoto e quindi capirà.
Sì, però cioè, capi, è brutto così. Che lui fa e voi eseguite, cioè non è così
No, perché aveva avuto tutto. Se volevo per sti conti. Non è che mi voglio frenare, però è giusto che lo sappiamo. E se poi venite, è successo questo, tu ce l'hai detto, mettetemi, non so, io vi dico le cose come stanno, poi vi regolate voi. No, come ho detto io, tu non puoi pure darla, hai ricevuto, tu l'hai visto. Scaricate la consultativa.
Sasi, stappa una birra, vedi che c'è. Non c'è.
Ho punto giù da adesso. Cazzo, mi sembra che devo parlare al blocco. Fanno fondo la luce. Così.
municipali, abbiamo un'azienda per le porte municipali. Mi credete una chiamata se non
Hello?
I'm here.
Oh, so sorry for keeping you waiting all this time, but I'm back.
No problem, you're welcome.
Thank you. Again, so sorry for this problem. And I guess I can continue from where I left off.
Sure.
Here, I guess I was talking about the application process. And I guess I was talking about the third day. So after the third day was dedicated to industrial automation and human-machine interface and the daily virtual classroom session. And then at the fourth day, there is a social program which constituted a Technopark presentation of the representatives of the Technopark. And then an entrepreneurship company's presentation, which is highly involved in Industry 4.0 technologies. These were all 1 hour theoretical lectures. After that, in the afternoon session, there was machine learning activities for 3 hours, 1 theoretical and 2 lab hours, and then the daily evaluation again. And for the 5th and the last day of the project, there was a technical tour to a German company which incorporates Industry 4.0 related topics. And sorry, and then after that, there was the focus group interview and the closing ceremony. And after the research process, I guess I can talk about the findings of the study. First of all, the quantitative results, mini projects were conducted for only 3 of the activities: the data mining, industrial automation and human-machine interface, and machine learning. Here are the number of participants at these activities and their average scores of the projects. And at the right-hand side, you can check the activities and students' satisfaction levels from each activity from a 3-point Likert scale. These data were gathered from the general evaluation form, which the students filled at the end of the project and the final day. And for the qualitative results, here are some of the suggestions, the positive and negative suggestions, feedbacks of students mentioned at both the focus group interviews and the daily virtual classroom sessions. If we check the positive ones first, we can say that the technical trip was stated with the most frequency, as the students were really satisfied with the technical trip, and they said that it reinforced the topics that they learned at the courses before. And they also liked the practical activities that they conducted. And also the social events were very satisfactory. And then they stated their satisfaction level with the lecturers and the teamwork activities and the mini projects as well. And stated that the program was overall important for their career development. And for the negative feedbacks, actually the main negative feedback was for the duration of the project. 1 week is a really limited time to conduct a project with high effects on the students. So the project time was mentioned as the most negative feedback. After that, students stated that they didn't like the presentations. They wanted more on-hand activities. That's the result of that reflection. And then the others were more related about the timeline, the one in the middle and the one at the bottom. And they also stated that they liked the teamwork activities. So if the project involved more participants, it would have been more fruitful and more fun. And after these feedbacks, as a conclusion of the project, we can say that the main novelty of this study is the fact that it's one of the first outreach projects conducted on Industry 4.0 concepts. So we have some limitations as well. As I mentioned before, the duration of the project is very limited for 1 week. And then the study group, the size of the study group is also limited because, as students also mentioned, the study group consisted of only 18 participants. So they wanted more participants. They wanted to interact with more participants to have better interaction and a better project. And in this regard, because of these limitations, we can say that the findings of the study may not be generalized. However, this study is a good step in the right direction for further research studies. And for future works, we are planning to organize a new activity, a new project, a new event with more participants in a longer period of time. That's all. Does anybody have any questions? I guess there are no questions. So, since there are no questions, I guess it's time to go to the second presentation of this session. Okay, the second presentation is on investigation of the effect of mobile learning application, a mobile learning application developed for graph theory education on academic performance of students. So I am Birol Çiloğlu'gil, the first author of this study. And here we can check the outline first. First, there's going to be a brief introduction and the motivation of this study, and then the related work will be briefly analyzed, and then the mobile learning application will be presented briefly, and then the method followed in the study and the results that we obtained will be discussed, and a conclusion will conclude this session. So when we start with the motivation first, we can say that graph theory is one of the important topics in discrete mathematics and in many engineering departments as well. So it serves an important foundation for other topics covered in other courses in the following semesters as well. And since it's important in many engineering disciplines, Supporting its education with supplementary e-learning tools is a fundamental approach that is also covered in the literature with many applications as well. So when we check the status of the literature, state of the art regarding the graph theory and m-learning, mobile learning, we can say that graph theory is used effectively in many applications, which we're gonna mention more in the related work sections. So in this study, we are going to introduce the mobile application first. Graph theory is covered as part of the discrete structures course in our department, and we developed a mobile learning application for to use. And in this study, we are going to investigate its effectiveness on academic performance of students. We are going to do this investigation in a period of 3 academic terms. So the main research question of our study is to analyze if there is any statistically significant difference on academic achievement levels of students in the experimental group that used this application as a supplementary tool, and the control group that followed regular instruction. And in order to analyze this research question, we used graph theory related questions of the final exams for 3 academic years. Here you can check the related work conducted on graph theory education, actually. The first reference is a relatively old one, which is actually an application library development where users can create their own graphs. The second study was conducted in 1998, and it deals with visualization of 2 graph algorithms, Dijkstra's shortest path algorithm and graph coloring algorithm. And then the third study is conducted in 2005. Here there is an online Java package which uses directed and undirected graphs, and which can also load existing graphs from neighborhood matrices. And the next study is from 2007, which is a library of mobile graph algorithms that covers actually 6 different types of algorithms: DFS, BFS, DFS, and Dijkstra, Euler, Hamilton, and graph coloring algorithms. And the next study is a more educational study, which investigated motivational levels of students in the age range of 5 to 17 on graph theory topics. And then the next study is an educational tool which teaches or supplements the education of students on how basic graph algorithms work. And then the next and the last study is a previous study of ours, which is the introduction of a mobile learning application for teaching graph theory related topics, and evaluation of the effectiveness of this application for a single academic term. And here, when we check the basic functionality covered by the mobile learning application, we can categorize them under 5 categories. Here you can see the first 3. Special graph types such as complete graphs, cycles, and wheels can be created automatically. And previously created graphs can be edited. In this regard, the users can add, delete, rename, and move vertices. And then they can add, delete edges between vertices, and they can assign or update edge values to these edges. And they can also work with different types of graphs, directed and undirected graphs, so they can change this at the runtime. And then the students or the users of this application can check different representations of graphs based on adjacency matrices or incidence matrices. And for the final two functionalities, first of all, the graph algorithms supported by the application are covered here. They are depth search, breadth first search, Dijkstra's shortest path algorithm, Euler and Hamilton path circuit detection algorithms, and graph coloring algorithm. Users can observe step-by-step execution of these algorithms, which is a novelty of this application. And then students can take quizzes to test their knowledge level at any time that they want. So this is the application. And when we check the methodology followed in the study, we can say that a quasi-experimental research design is followed with experimental and control groups. When we check the study group, students were categorized voluntarily. And these are freshman students that are at the first grade taking the discrete structures course. So this study is conducted for 3 years, and we can check the number of participants at each year. For the first year, there are 34 participants in the experimental group. For the second year, there are 52, and for the third year, there are 75 participants. So there is an increase at the number of participants in the experimental group. When we check the control group, the number of participants decrease as the total number of students are the students taking the course, and this is relatively the same. For the research process, we can say that the discrete structures course covers graph theory topic at the final as the final topic of the lecture for a period of 3 weeks. And additional lab hours were conducted for this 3-week period, and various features of the mobile application were introduced to the students in the experimental group in these laboratory sessions of 45 minutes. And after that, in this lab sessions, examples were conducted. Examples were solved with students by using the mobile application to reinforce the topics covered at the course. And after that, after the introduction sessions, the lab sessions, students were able to use the mobile application anytime they want as a supplementary tool. As for the data collection instruments, as I said before, we use the final grades of the students. And each year, the number of points available from graph questions were different. For the first year, out of the 100 points available, 45 points were related to graph questions. For the second year, 67 points. And for the third year, 60 points were from graph theory related questions. And the rest of the points were from other questions that were covered previously before the graph theory topic. And as for the results, when we check the results for the first year, we can check here for the, for example, for the graph theory related questions, we can check the number of participants, the mean scores, standard deviation, and the t-test results here. As we can see, the mean score of both graph questions and non-graph questions, the mean scores of the experimental group were higher than the scores of the control group. And when we check the t-test results, we can say that with the p-values stated here, there's a statistically significant difference in favor of the experimental group in both question types. For the second year, out of the available 67 points, when we check the average scores, experimental group is again more successful, as the mean scores suggest here. And their standard deviation is lower, which also mentions that the experimental group, students were more cohesively, students had more cohesively distributed scores. And actually, the results of the other questions are relatively similar, with experimental group having higher mean scores. But here they have a higher standard deviation, which is a bad thing for the other questions. But for the graph questions, this decrease at the standard deviation is a good thing. And for the third year, when we check the results for graph questions, again, the experimental group is more successful. However, the number of participants is relatively higher than the control group. And standard deviation scores is again lower. Actually, this time it's lower in both type of questions. And when we check the t-test results, we can say that again, the results are statistically significant. So after seeing both of the results for each year, we can say that the mobile learning applications usage as a supplementary tool was effective on academic success, academic performance of students at each year. And an interesting finding is that non-graph theory related questions were also analyzed. And there's a statistically significant difference again in favor of the experimental group. But this can be explained with the study group formation, as students voluntarily participated in the experimental group. Thus, students with more self-regulation skills could have chosen to be a participant, and that may be a result of this. And another indication of this can be the number of participants at the experimental group, as there was an increase at each year. This can be interpreted actually in two different ways. First of all, we can say that the adoption of the mobile application, we can relate this with the adoption of the mobile application, as participants got more familiar with the application. So their attitudes towards the M-learning system can be higher by each year. And the second finding or second thing that can be related to this, maybe students were in contact with the participants of the previous year, and they may suggest the students of the following years to participate in the study, as they are satisfied by using the tool. So that may be another factor that made it possible to observe these findings. And so I guess that's all, and I can say something for the future work directions. For future work, sorry again, I'm having a little problem here, but the presentation will be back just in a second. By the way, I guess I can talk without the presentation. Just a second. For the future work, we can say that the application supports graph algorithms, but its support can be enhanced in future work. More graph algorithms can be supported and more features can be added to the application. And another thing can be the interaction of students, the interaction data of students with the mobile learning application can be tracked. And this way, suggestions to students can be given based on the interaction data. I guess that's all from me. And I guess there are no participants to ask any questions, but I'm just going to ask in case there are any questions.
No question.
Okay.
Congratulations for your work. Unfortunately, I belong to a total another sector of research, so I was not able to follow your study very effectively. Okay, as a technical assistant, I have to remind you to compile the evaluation form.
Okay, thank you.
And that's it.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much. This actually session was not very fruitful as there were no participants, but I guess there's nothing we can do. So maybe some other, there were some other sessions that they wanted to participate and they can watch the YouTube video later. So thank you very much for your assistance and hopefully see you later as face-to-face maybe at the next edition of ICCSA.
Perfect. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.